The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Lieutenant Sarah Chen adjusted her tactical vest one more time. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, she looked almost fragile among the towering male soldiers surrounding her. The other recruits in the elite Special Forces training program stood in formation, their muscles bulging beneath their uniforms, their faces carved with the confidence that came from years of physical dominance. "Look at Tiny Chen," whispered Sergeant Marcus Williams to the soldier next to him. "She's going to get crushed in today's exercise." His voice carried just enough volume for Sarah to hear, which was exactly his intention. The snickers rippled through the formation like a wave. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw set in determination. She had heard it all before. Too small, too weak, too female. The comments had followed her through every stage of her military career, from basic training to officer candidate school, and now here at the most prestigious special operations program in the country. Only 12 soldiers had been selected from thousands of applicants, and she was the only woman. "Listen up, maggots!" Colonel Harrison's voice boomed across the training ground. The 60-year-old officer strode before the formation, his weathered face bearing the scars of 3 decades in special operations. His gray eyes swept over each soldier with the intensity of a laser. "Today's exercise is urban warfare simulation. You'll be divided into 2 teams of 6. The mission is simple: infiltrate the mock city, neutralize the enemy targets, and extract the hostage. Time limit is 2 hours. Sarah's heart pounded as the colonel continued his briefing. She had trained for months for this moment, studying every manual, practicing every technique until her muscles ached and her mind was exhausted. But she knew that none of that mattered if she couldn't prove herself today. "Williams, you'll lead Alpha Team," the colonel announced. Marcus stepped forward with a cocky grin, already mentally selecting his team members. Sarah watched as he pointed to the 5 largest, most intimidating soldiers in the formation. Not a single one even glanced in her direction. "Chen, you'll lead Bravo Team," Colonel Harrison said, his voice neutral but his eyes studying her reaction carefully. The remaining soldiers looked at each other with barely concealed disappointment. Nobody wanted to be on the team led by the smallest person in the group. Sarah stepped forward and surveyed her options. What she saw made her stomach sink. Her team consisted of Private Jackson, a 19-year-old from rural Alabama who had barely passed the physical fitness requirements; Corporal Rodriguez, who was nursing a shoulder injury from the previous week's training; Private First Class Thompson, who was brilliant with technology but had never seen combat; Sergeant Davis, who was nearing retirement and had volunteered for the program more out of curiosity than ambition; and finally, Private Kim, a quiet soldier from California who seemed more interested in studying maps than engaging with his fellow trainees. "The rejects versus the all-stars," Marcus called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This should be interesting." Colonel Harrison shot him a warning look, but said nothing. The unofficial betting among the training staff was already heavily favored toward Alpha Team. Some of the instructors didn't even bother to hide their skepticism about Bravo Team's chances. Sarah gathered her team in a tight circle away from the others. "I know what everyone's thinking," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "They think we're the leftovers. They think we don't have a chance." She looked each of her team members in the eye. "But I've been watching all of you train for weeks, and I know something they don't. We each have skills that Alpha Team doesn't have." Private Thompson looked up from the ground for the first time. "Like what?" "Jackson, you might be small, but you're the fastest runner here. I've watched you." "Rodriguez, that shoulder injury taught you to fight smart instead of just fighting hard." "Thompson, your computer skills are better than anyone else's in this program." "Davis, you have more real combat experience than half the instructors." "And Kim, you study every map and building layout like your life depends on it." She paused, letting her words sink in. "They have strength and size. We have speed, intelligence, and creativity. and we're going to use every advantage we have. The mock city was an impressive training facility covering several acres. It included multi-story buildings, narrow alleyways, simulated civilian areas, and numerous hiding spots for both attackers and defenders. The enemy forces were played by advanced training instructors armed with paintball weapons. Getting hit meant elimination from the exercise. As both teams prepared their gear, Sarah noticed Marcus and his team gathering around a detailed blueprint of the facility. They were planning a direct assault, using their superior firepower and physical presence to overwhelm the defenders through the main entrance. Sarah pulled out her own map and spread it on the ground. "Look here," she said to her team, pointing to a series of maintenance tunnels marked in fine print along the edges of the blueprint. "Most people ignore these because they're tight spaces. But if we can get through here," she traced a route with her finger, "we can come up behind their main defensive positions." "Those tunnels are barely 3 feet high," Davis pointed out. "Marcus and his team would never fit." "Exactly," Sarah smiled. "But we will." As the exercise began, both teams moved out from their starting positions on opposite sides of the mock city. The objective was a 3-story building in the center where a mannequin representing a hostage was being held by instructor defenders. Marcus led his team in a textbook frontal assault. Their boots thundered against the pavement as they charged toward the main street leading to the target building. Within minutes, the sound of paintball gunfire echoed through the facility as they engaged the first line of defenders. Meanwhile, Sarah's team moved quietly along the perimeter of the city. She led them to a small maintenance shed that housed the entrance to the tunnel system. The metal grate covering the opening was heavy, but together they managed to pry it loose. "I'll go first," Sarah said, dropping to her hands and knees. The tunnel was dark, cramped, and filled with the smell of rust and concrete dust. But it was exactly as she had hoped. Too small for larger soldiers to navigate quickly. One by one, her team followed her through the underground network. The sounds of battle above grew louder as Marcus's team pressed their attack. Sarah could hear the instructors' voices coordinating their defense, all focused on the main assault. After 20 minutes of crawling through the tunnels, Sarah found the access point she was looking for. A maintenance ladder led up to a basement level of the target building. She climbed carefully, listening for any sounds above. The basement was empty. The defenders were all focused on the upper floors, watching for Marcus's inevitable attempt to storm the building. Sarah signaled for her team to follow her up. They moved like shadows through the building's lower level, their small size allowing them to hide behind equipment and furniture that would never conceal larger soldiers. Thompson used his technical skills to disable the building's alarm system, while Kim navigated them through the complex layout using his memorized knowledge of the blueprints. Meanwhile, Alpha Team was taking heavy casualties. Despite their superior firepower, they were trapped in a crossfire in the main courtyard. Marcus's aggressive tactics had walked them straight into a carefully prepared trap. "Alpha Team is pinned down," came the radio chatter from the exercise controllers. "Multiple casualties. They're requesting permission to withdraw and regroup." In the target building, Sarah's team had reached the 2nd floor without being detected. The hostage was being held on the 3rd floor, guarded by 3 instructors who were more focused on watching for Marcus's next assault than checking their rear. Sarah made hand signals to her team, positioning them for a coordinated strike. Davis, despite his age, moved with the quiet precision of his decades of experience. Rodriguez, favoring his injured shoulder, found an angle that allowed him to use his good arm effectively. At Sarah's signal, they struck simultaneously. 3 paintball hits marked the defending instructors before they even knew what was happening. The hostage was secured in under 30 seconds. "Exercise complete," Sarah spoke into her radio. "Bravo Team has secured the hostage." The silence that followed was deafening. Through the building's windows, Sarah could see Marcus and the survivors of his team standing in the courtyard, their faces painted with disbelief and frustration. Back at the debriefing area, the atmosphere was tense. Alpha Team sat in sullen silence, while Bravo Team tried to contain their excitement about their unexpected victory. The training staff huddled together, reviewing the exercise footage and comparing notes. 37 minutes, announced Colonel Harrison, reading from his clipboard. That's the fastest hostage rescue time recorded in this training program in over 2 years. Marcus stood up abruptly. Sir, with all due respect, they got lucky. My team took out more enemy targets than theirs did. We would have completed the mission if we'd had more time. Sergeant Williams, the colonel's voice carried a warning edge. Sitting down would be advisable right now. But Marcus was too frustrated to listen to subtle warnings. Sir, I'm just saying that a real combat situation would be different. Size and strength matter. Chen's team succeeded because this was just a game with paintball guns. A game? Colonel Harrison's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more intimidating than if he had shouted. You think this training is a game, Sergeant? Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She had led her team to victory, but Marcus was dismissing their achievement as luck and suggesting she wasn't capable of real combat. Sir, I didn't mean, Marcus began, but the colonel cut him off with a raised hand. Chen, step forward, Harrison commanded. Sarah approached the colonel, her back straight and her eyes forward. She expected him to defend her team's tactical success, perhaps to lecture Marcus about respecting his fellow soldiers. What she didn't expect was for the colonel to study her with an intensity that made her feel like he was looking straight through her. Colonel Harrison walked slowly around Sarah, examining her uniform, her posture, her equipment. The other soldiers watched in confused silence. Finally, he stopped directly in front of her and reached for something on her uniform that nobody else had noticed. On Sarah's left sleeve, barely visible beneath her tactical vest, was a small patch that most people would mistake for a standard military insignia. It was black with a silver design that looked like a coiled snake. The colonel's weathered fingers traced the edge of the patch, and his expression changed completely. The hard lines of his face softened, and something that looked almost like recognition flickered in his gray eyes. Where did you get this patch, Lieutenant Chen? He asked quietly. Sarah hesitated for a moment. It was my father's, sir. He served in Vietnam. The colonel nodded slowly, still staring at the patch. Around them, the other soldiers shifted restlessly, not understanding what was happening or why a simple family memento had captured their commanding officer's attention so completely. Your father's name? Harrison asked. Staff Sergeant David Chen, sir. He served with the 5th Special Forces Group. The colonel was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the formation stand a little straighter. Sergeant Williams, he said, without taking his eyes off the patch. You wanted to know about real combat situations. You wanted to question whether Lieutenant Chen could handle herself when the paintball guns are replaced with real bullets. Marcus nodded, though he was beginning to look uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Colonel Harrison finally looked up from the patch and swept his gaze across the entire formation. When he spoke again, his words would change everything Sarah thought she knew about her own family history, and everything her fellow soldiers thought they knew about who she really was. Colonel Harrison's voice cut through the afternoon air like a blade. That patch belongs to a unit that officially never existed. A unit that was so classified that even today, 20 years after the Cold War ended, most of their missions remain sealed in government vaults. Sarah felt her world tilt on its axis. Her father had always been quiet about his military service, deflecting her childhood questions with gentle humor and subject changes. She had assumed he was just another infantry soldier who preferred not to relive difficult memories. Sir, I don't understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The colonel reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his own identification tags. Hanging alongside them was an identical black patch with the same silver-coiled snake design. "The Black Vipers, Lieutenant Chen. Your father and I served together in a unit that specialized in impossible missions behind enemy lines, deep reconnaissance, high-value target elimination. Operations that required soldiers who could disappear into hostile territory for weeks at a time and emerge like ghosts to complete their objectives." The formation of soldiers stood in stunned silence. Even Marcus had lost his cocky demeanor, his mouth hanging open as he processed what the colonel was saying. "Staff Sergeant David Chen was one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege of serving with," Harrison continued. 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighed maybe 140 pounds, soaking wet. Every new guy who met him thought he was a clerk or a cook who had wandered into the wrong unit by mistake. Sarah's mind raced back to memories of her father, his quiet confidence, the way he moved through their house like he was constantly aware of every entrance and exit. How he could disappear into the woods behind their home and emerge hours later without making a sound. She had always attributed these quirks to his general military training, never imagining they were the products of elite special operations conditioning. "Sir," Sergeant Davis spoke up from Sarah's team, "what kind of missions are we talking about?" Colonel Harrison's eyes grew distant, as if he was seeing events from decades past. "Cambodia, 1971. 3 American prisoners of war had been moved to a camp that officially didn't exist, in a country we officially weren't operating in. The Vipers were tasked with extracting them before they could be transferred to North Vietnam." He paused, looking directly at Sarah. "Your father volunteered to go in alone first, to gather intelligence on the camp's defenses. He spent 6 days in the jungle, living off insects and rainwater, mapping every guard rotation, every weak point, every escape route." "One man?" Private Thompson asked incredulously. "One man," the colonel confirmed. When the rest of the team went in for the extraction, David had already neutralized half the guards without raising an alarm. The mission was completed in under 2 hours, and all 3 prisoners were successfully recovered. Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Her father had died when she was 16, taking his military stories with him. She had joined the army partly to understand the man he had been, but she had never imagined anything like this. "The Vipers were disbanded in 1975, Colonel Harrison continued. "Most of the surviving members disappeared into civilian life or transferred to other units. Your father chose to stay in the army, but requested a transfer to non-combat roles. He said he wanted to start a family and didn't want to risk leaving a wife and children behind." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling with this new information. "Sir, with all due respect, that was a long time ago. Things were different then. Combat requirements have changed." The colonel turned his attention to Marcus, with the same intensity he had focused on Sarah moments before. "Have they, Sergeant? Tell me, what exactly has changed about the need for soldiers who can think creatively under pressure? What has changed about the value of small unit tactics and stealth over brute force?" Before Marcus could answer, Colonel Harrison continued. "In fact, let me tell you about something that happened just 18 months ago in Afghanistan. A joint special operations team was tasked with infiltrating a Taliban compound to capture a high-value target. The assault team consisted of 12 soldiers, all men, all physically impressive specimens like yourself, Sergeant Williams." The colonel began pacing in front of the formation as he spoke. "The mission was a disaster. The target compound was more heavily defended than intelligence had indicated. The assault team was detected before they could reach the objective, and they found themselves pinned down in a firefight that lasted for over 3 hours. Sarah noticed that several of the training staff had gathered around to listen to the colonel's story. This was clearly not something they had heard before. "A female captain from the Army Rangers was part of the quick reaction force called in to assist with the extraction. Captain Maria Valdez, 5 feet 3 inches tall, 115 pounds. Sound familiar?" The colonel stopped pacing and fixed his gaze on Marcus. When the assault team reported they were trapped and taking casualties, Captain Valdez requested permission to attempt an infiltration route that the larger soldiers couldn't use. She went in alone, through a drainage system that connected to the compound's basement. "What happened?" Private Jackson asked quietly. "She eliminated 4 guards without raising an alarm, disabled the compound's communications equipment, and opened a rear entrance that allowed the assault team to complete their mission. The high-value target was captured, and no American lives were lost." Colonel Harrison walked over to Marcus, stopping just inches from his face. "Tell me, Sergeant Williams, was Captain Valdez just lucky? Was that a game with paintball guns?" Marcus's face had gone pale. "No, sir. The Black Vipers were disbanded because the Cold War ended and the military believed that kind of specialized unit was no longer necessary," the colonel continued. "They were wrong. In today's asymmetric warfare environment, the ability to operate undetected in hostile territory is more valuable than ever." Sarah felt the weight of her father's legacy settling on her shoulders. She had always known he was a good soldier, but understanding that she carried the genetic and cultural inheritance of an elite warrior changed everything about how she saw herself and her place in the military. "Lieutenant Chen," Colonel Harrison said, turning back to her, "your performance in today's exercise wasn't luck, and it wasn't a fluke. You demonstrated the same tactical thinking and leadership qualities that made your father one of the most effective special operations soldiers of his generation." He addressed the entire formation. "This training program isn't about finding the biggest or strongest soldiers. It's about identifying individuals who can accomplish the impossible when conventional tactics fail. Sometimes that means having the physical strength to carry a wounded comrade to safety. Sometimes it means having the mental flexibility to find a solution that nobody else considered." Private Thompson raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, what happened to the other Black Vipers?" "Some are still serving in various capacities throughout the military. Others have moved into intelligence work or private security. A few, like your father," he nodded to Sarah, "chose family life over continued military service." The colonel reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small envelope. "Your father left this with me before he transferred out of special operations. He asked me to give it to his children if they ever chose to serve in the military." Sarah took the envelope with shaking hands. Her name was written on the front in her father's careful handwriting. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a second Black Viper patch, identical to the one on her sleeve. The letter was brief, but every word carried the weight of her father's experience and love. Sarah, if you are reading this, it means you have chosen to serve your country as I did. The patch that brought you to Colonel Harrison's attention was mine, but this second patch belongs to you if you prove worthy of it. The Black Vipers were more than a military unit. We were a family bound by shared sacrifice and uncommon dedication. You carry my blood and my training, but more importantly, you carry the responsibility to use your gifts in service of others. Make me proud. Dad. Tears flowed freely down Sarah's cheeks as she read her father's words. Around her, the other soldiers watched in respectful silence, finally understanding that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple training exercise debrief. Colonel Harrison's voice softened as he spoke to the entire formation. "Each of you was selected for this program because you demonstrated exceptional potential. But potential means nothing without the character to use it properly. Today's exercise revealed more about your individual capabilities than months of physical fitness tests and marksmanship evaluations." He looked at Marcus, whose earlier swagger had completely evaporated. "Sergeant Williams, you led your team with courage and determination. Those are valuable qualities in a leader. But you also demonstrated a dangerous tendency to underestimate opponents and rely solely on superior firepower. In real combat, those weaknesses can get people killed." Marcus nodded, his face burning with embarrassment, but also, Sarah noticed, with what looked like genuine understanding. "Lieutenant Chen," the colonel continued, "you proved today that the tactical brilliance of the Black Vipers lives on. But with that heritage comes responsibility. Your father and his unit understood that their greatest weapon wasn't their individual skills. It was their ability to function as a team and accomplish missions that seemed impossible." Sarah carefully folded her father's letter and tucked it into her breast pocket next to her heart. The second Black Viper patch felt heavy in her hand, like it carried the weight of history and expectation. "Sir," she said, her voice stronger now than it had been all day, "what happens now?" Colonel Harrison smiled for the first time since the exercise had ended. "Now, Lieutenant, you and your team have earned the right to participate in advanced training that most soldiers never see. The Black Vipers may be officially disbanded, but their methods and their mission continue in other forms." He turned to address the entire formation one final time. "Tomorrow morning, you will all begin the next phase of your training. Some of you will focus on direct action operations. Others will learn advanced reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. And a select few," his eyes found Sarah's, "will be introduced to techniques that have remained classified for decades." As the formation was dismissed, Sarah's teammates gathered around her, their earlier feelings of being chosen last replaced with a growing sense of pride in what they had accomplished together. "So," Private Thompson said with a grin, "turns out we weren't the rejects after all." "Never were," Sarah replied, pinning her father's second Black Viper patch to her other sleeve. "We just needed to prove it to ourselves." But even as her team celebrated their unexpected victory, Sarah knew that the real test was still to come. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and with them, the opportunity to either live up to her father's legacy or disappoint the memory of the most elite unit the military had ever created. The sun was setting over the training ground, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of the secrets and stories that lived within the military's classified history. Sarah touched the patch on her sleeve and made a silent promise to the father she had never fully known. She would prove worthy of the Black Viper name, no matter what it cost her. 3 weeks after the revelation about her father's service, Sarah found herself standing in a nondescript concrete building 30 miles from the main training facility. The sign outside read simply, "Advanced Tactical Studies," but she knew from Colonel Harrison's briefing that this was where the military's most sensitive training programs were conducted. The classroom contained only 6 students, all pulled from different branches of the armed forces. Sarah was the youngest by at least 5 years, and once again, the only woman. But the dynamic felt completely different from her previous training. These soldiers looked at her with respect rather than skepticism, their attention focused on what she could contribute rather than what she might lack. "Welcome to Black Operations Advanced Training," announced Colonel Harrison as he entered the room, carrying a stack of classified folders. "What you learn here will never appear on your official military records. The techniques we'll teach you are based on decades of field experience from special operations units that officially never existed." He placed a folder in front of each student. "Your first mission briefing, this is not a simulation. In 72 hours, you will deploy to a hostile environment to complete an objective that conventional forces have failed to achieve 3 times. Sarah opened her folder with hands that trembled slightly. Inside were satellite photographs, intelligence reports, and detailed mission parameters that made her blood run cold. A group of American contractors had been taken hostage by insurgents in a remote region of Eastern Europe. The hostage-takers were holed up in an abandoned Soviet-era military installation that was virtually impregnable to direct assault. 3 previous rescue attempts have failed, Colonel Harrison continued. The first 2 were conventional Special Forces operations that resulted in the deaths of 4 rescuers and 2 hostages. The third was a larger assault involving air support that ended when the remaining hostages were executed before the facility could be breached. Private Kim, who had been on Sarah's successful training team, raised his hand. "Sir, if conventional special forces couldn't complete this mission, what makes us different?" "Because," the colonel replied, "we're not going in as a conventional special forces unit. We're going in as Black Vipers." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just advanced training. They were being reactivated as members of a unit that hadn't existed for 20 years. Over the next 3 days, Sarah and her fellow trainees were immersed in techniques that pushed the boundaries of everything she thought she knew about military operations. They learned how to create improvised explosive devices from household chemicals, how to disappear into urban environments for weeks at a time, and how to kill silently using weapons that could never be traced back to American forces. The training was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Where her previous military education had focused on following established protocols and procedures, Black Viper training emphasized improvisation, adaptation, and thinking beyond conventional limitations. "The enemy expects soldiers," explained Master Sergeant Reynolds, a grizzled veteran who claimed to have served with the original Black Vipers. "They prepare for soldiers. They don't prepare for ghosts." Sarah excelled at the stealth training, her small size allowing her to hide in spaces that her larger teammates couldn't access. But it was during the psychological warfare instruction that she truly began to understand what made the Black Vipers different from ordinary special forces. "Your greatest weapon isn't your rifle or your explosives," Reynolds told the class. "It's the enemy's own fear and uncertainty. A Black Viper operation should leave the survivors wondering if they were attacked by American special forces, local rebels, or something supernatural." On the third day, Colonel Harrison pulled Sarah aside for private instruction. "Your teammates are excellent soldiers," he said, "but you have something they don't. You have the genetic memory of a Black Viper. Your father's instincts are in your blood." He led her to a specialized training room filled with equipment she didn't recognize. David Chen could read a hostile environment like most people read a book. He could sense danger before it became visible, identify escape routes before he needed them, and predict enemy behavior with uncanny accuracy. Over the next several hours, Harrison put Sarah through exercises designed to awaken those inherited instincts. He taught her to move through darkened buildings using only sound and air currents to navigate. He showed her how to identify the location and number of enemies by analyzing the echoes of their footsteps and the patterns of their breathing. "Close your eyes," he commanded, as they stood in a mock urban environment. "Tell me how many hostile targets are in the building across the street." Sarah closed her eyes and extended her senses. At first, she heard nothing but the ambient noise of the training facility. But gradually, she began to pick up subtler sounds: the creak of floorboards under someone's weight, the whisper of clothing against wall surfaces, the barely audible murmur of conversation. "4," she said finally. "2 on the ground floor, probably near the front entrance, 1 on the second floor, moving between rooms, 1 on the roof." When she opened her eyes, Colonel Harrison was smiling. "Your father could do that same exercise and tell me not just how many enemies were present, but which ones were left-handed and who was wearing new boots." As their training neared completion, Sarah felt a transformation taking place within herself. The uncertain young officer who had endured months of mockery and skepticism was being replaced by someone harder, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. The night before their deployment, she called her mother from a secure phone line. "Mom," she said, "I need to ask you something about Dad." Her mother's voice was warm but cautious. "What do you want to know, sweetheart? Did you know what he really did in the Army? Did you know about the Black Vipers?" The silence that followed stretched so long that Sarah wondered if the connection had been lost. Finally, her mother spoke in a voice that sounded older than Sarah remembered. "I knew he was different from other soldiers," she said. "He would disappear for weeks at a time on missions he couldn't discuss. When he came home, it would take him days to readjust to normal life, like he was slowly returning from somewhere very far away." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because he made me promise not to. He said that if you chose to serve, you would discover the truth when you were ready. He didn't want his legacy to influence your decision or put pressure on you to follow a path you might not be suited for." Sarah felt tears building in her eyes. "Mom, I'm about to do something that might be dangerous. I can't tell you what or where, but I need you to know that I understand now why Dad was the way he was." "Sarah," her mother's voice carried a tremor of fear mixed with pride, "promise me you'll come home." "I promise, Mom. I have too much left to prove." The next morning, Sarah and her team boarded an unmarked transport aircraft that would take them to a military base in Germany. From there, they would infiltrate the target region, using civilian identities and equipment that could never be traced back to the United States government. As the plane climbed into the pre-dawn darkness, Colonel Harrison reviewed the mission parameters one final time. "The hostage-takers are expecting another conventional assault. They've positioned themselves to repel a large force attacking from predictable directions. But they're not prepared for 6 ghosts who can appear anywhere and disappear just as quickly." Sarah studied the satellite photos of their target, memorizing every detail of the Soviet-era installation. The complex was built into a mountainside with only 2 main entrances and multiple defensive positions that provided excellent fields of fire against any approaching force. "Sir," asked Sergeant Martinez, another member of their team, "what's our backup plan if something goes wrong?" Colonel Harrison's expression was grim. "There is no backup plan. If this operation fails, the hostages die, and you 6 become casualties of a training accident that never happened. The Black Vipers have always operated without a safety net." The weight of that responsibility settled over the team like a heavy blanket. They were not just soldiers anymore. They were the inheritors of a legacy that demanded success at any cost. 12 hours later, Sarah found herself crouched in a drainage ditch 2 kilometers from the target facility. She wore civilian hiking clothes and carried identification papers that listed her as a graduate student researching Eastern European wildlife. Her weapons were concealed in a backpack designed to look like scientific equipment. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. While the hostage-takers focused their attention on the main approaches to the facility, Sarah would infiltrate through a forgotten maintenance tunnel that connected to the installation's water treatment system. Once inside, she would neutralize the guards and create an opening for her teammates to extract the hostages. As she approached the tunnel entrance, Sarah felt her father's presence stronger than ever. Every movement, every decision felt guided by instincts she had inherited, but never understood until now. She moved through the darkness like water, silent and fluid, adapting to each new obstacle without conscious thought. The maintenance tunnel was exactly as the intelligence reports had described. A narrow concrete pipe, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. For the next hour, Sarah made her way through the underground network, navigating by memory and intuition. When she emerged in the facility's basement, she could hear voices and footsteps from the floors above. According to their intelligence, the hostages were being held in a room on the 2nd floor, guarded by at least 6 armed men. Sarah made her way through the building like her father's ghost, neutralizing guards one by one without raising an alarm. Each elimination was quick and silent, leaving no trace of her presence except for unconscious enemies who would wake up hours later with no memory of what had happened. When she finally reached the hostage room, she found 3 American contractors bound and blindfolded but alive. The guards who were supposed to be watching them had been called away to investigate a disturbance that her teammates had created at the facility's main entrance. "Don't make a sound," she whispered as she cut their restraints. "I'm here to get you out." The extraction took less than 10 minutes. By the time the hostage-takers realized what had happened, Sarah and the rescued contractors were already disappearing into the forest, guided by her teammates who had melted away from their diversionary attack as quickly as they had appeared. 6 hours later, they were on a transport helicopter heading back to friendly territory. The mission had been completed without firing a single shot or losing a single life. As they flew through the mountain valleys, Colonel Harrison placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Your father would be proud," he said simply. Sarah touched the black viper patches on her sleeves and smiled. She had finally understood what it meant to be David Chen's daughter, and she had proven herself worthy of carrying on a legacy that would always remain officially invisible, but would never truly disappear. The helicopter disappeared into the darkness, carrying 6 ghosts who had once again accomplished the impossible. In the classified files that would never see the light of day, the mission would be recorded as another successful Black Viper operation. But for Sarah, it was something far more personal. It was the moment when she finally became the soldier her father had always known she could be.